Hello and welcome to the TGH College Hardwood podcast. I am Joe. With me is Greg, as always, here to recap a crazy week of college basketball and then pick our next week. Although we really don't know what's going to go on this year. That's how crazy this season's been. Greg, how you doing?
Yeah, we're not gonna make picks anymore. We're gonna make guesses, educated guesses on what we think is gonna happen. Because at this point, who knows, Joe? Wild week. I think we got it was 1, 2, 4, and 5 at least this week lost, and of course a couple of the back end top 25 teams a week. Like I can't remember in a long time, if ever. So, just wild. Kept you on your toes.
Yeah, I think there was like 16 or 17 ranked teams who lost this week, and some of them lost twice. So it just makes it more interesting as we go into conference play. Where there's more and more matchups happening. The first week can always be tough with a lot of true road games being happening for the first time, and road games where a lot of students are actually at the venue. So we have a lot to get to, Greg. So let's get to it. We're going to try to keep a shot clock on us, an informal shot clock on some of this stuff because we have a ton to get to. First thing to get to: Houston loses to Iowa State on Tuesday. Hilton Magic is real. I said it was kind of overblown last week. I was wrong. I think sometimes Hilton Magic can overstep its bounds in terms of Iowa State sometimes has some good teams too. I don't think it's not the environment's hostile. Don't get me wrong, but Iowa State's a pretty good team, and now they're 12-3 overall and looking like a pretty solid bet to make the tournament this year and have some pretty good talent there. And Houston, pretty rough week for them. This is the first game we're going to talk about for them, so it's not ideal. But when you get into the Big 12 and have to start playing some of these tougher road games, it's going to be harder. I don't think anyone expected them to go through their season like they did the last couple of years in the American.
Yeah, I want to start with Iowa State. We kind of said when we were picking this game last week, it was I don't know if it was, I can't remember if I said it was like a prove it to me game, like I've said about some other teams or what, but Iowa State's schedule was kind of light. Like 75% of the schedule was in Q4. Their best win was Iowa. This is a team that it's a program that I feel like in years past, it's been compiled a certain way, and now the rest of the nation is kind of doing the same thing. It's all transfers and whatnot, but this is a good win for them. It is a win at home. I can't imagine there will be any. I know Houston had a bad week, but I I don't think they're dropping out of the top 30. So I would imagine this is going to be a Q1 win. Um, there's a couple good pieces on this team. There's Timin Lipsey's their point guard. I know there's a name that I brought up earlier this year that I made myself pronounce, Milan Mumsilic. That's another freshman player that seems to be a contributor. Joe, I know I mentioned something to you. I think it was late earlier this week. I guess he's not playing. I mentioned that we haven't heard a word out of Omaha Blue from Iowa State. Was one of their big recruits. So they're doing all this at the moment. I'm assuming he's injured, but this is a team that just kind of hasn't been on our radar. So I'll maybe dive into that and see if I can figure out what's going on with that. But yeah, on the Houston side, I mean, we'll get to their other game, but is this? It's not panic mode time for Houston, is it? What do you think?
No, I mean they're still a very good team. It's just they had a tough games entering the Big 12. There's no easy gimmies in this league, as we saw with UCF and Kansas, which we'll get to here later. No, it's totally fine. They'll end up being fine. Maybe some depth issues. They've had some injuries that could come back and bite them, but they're going to make the tournament. Maybe they're not a one seed like they have been in the past, but maybe this shows that some of the smaller conference teams who do get the one seeds, while Houston did challenge themselves out of conference all those years, maybe it does mean something to play in a league that's tough. And we saw with UConn last year. UConn ended up being the best team in the tournament by far, but they struggled with the Big East play, and that's something Houston hasn't had to deal with. And that's just something I think people have to recognize. They're not going to be this team that wins 30 games ever again. It's just not going to happen. So, excuse me, good win for Iowa State. We'll move on, Greg. We have Texas beating Cincinnati. We had Max Asmus hitting a nice shot at the end of the game to give Texas the win here. Texas did lose later in the week to lose their ranking, but I think for this team, the return of Dylan Dessou is huge. We had mentioned that they were inconsistent earlier in the year. They still are inconsistent, but he put in 33 points in this game. He was on fire. He's got a really soft touch for a big guy. That's going to be what I think could get them back on the right track when things do get right.
Yeah, I know this is a point I already mentioned earlier this year, but this team they are a buzzer beater from Max Smith against Louisville away, and now a buzzer beater against Cincinnati away from just being like completely out of the conversation. They did, as Joe mentioned, they lost to West Virginia later in the week. That's really not a good loss. That's a Q3 loss. I don't know what to make of this team. I think this is just Texas has just kind of been a team that's been on the back of our minds for most of the year. I think both you and I have kind of said, yeah, they're in the top 25, but like, do they really belong there? Or are they just kind of there in name alone? And the program obviously has taken a little bit of a step back since their whole fiasco with Chris Beard and whatnot. And they're trying their best. There's still some good pieces there, but I don't know what to make of this team. I don't want to say I'm out on them as even making the tournament, but I mean, they've got the Cincinnati win, and that's about it. So like, I don't know what to make of that right now.
Yeah, I still think Texas can make the tournament. I'm not in total panic mode for them either. I mean, we're just in the top 25. We know that doesn't always mean everything, but tough win at Cincinnati. Dylan DeSuze played 7 games, 2 of them this week were the wins Cincinnati lost at West Virginia, but I think him getting back to normal is going to be huge. This is a team that doesn't have a lot of depth anymore. I mean, they've had obviously some changes in the program. Chris Beard isn't there. Rodney Terry takes over. They decided to stick with Rodney Terry, but just, they got Max Abmas in the portal, and that really helps the starting lineup, and they have 2 point guards in the starting lineup, and that's really cool. But they need to settle down and figure some things out, and I think having Dessou back will get them back on the right track eventually. It's going to be tough in the Big 12, but I'm still not hitting the panic mode. You're right. It is hard to figure them out, though, and maybe Dessou can bring that clarity. Next one up, we have BYU losing to Baylor on the road. Baylor had their new nice arena in this game that people have been complaining about because of the camera angle. We don't think that's going to be fixed this year, so just be careful if you watch any Baylor games. But they win this one 81-72. Baylor still not the greatest defensive team, but Jalen Bridges had 25 points in this game. If they can score 80 points a game, they should win most of their games. And then BYU, I don't want to call them frauds because I never really thought they were good, Greg, but they're a team that relies on the three entirely too much. There's going to be games where they hit them and they win games that maybe they shouldn't win. There's going to be games where they don't hit them and they lose games they shouldn't lose. So not a team you can have too much faith in just based on the way they play.
Yeah, you brought up BYU shooting a lot of threes, Joe. I know there was an article. I think it was John Gassaway compared. It was Dayton, BYU, and another team. I cannot recall off the top of my head who the third team was, but just talking about a bunch of teams that kind of heavily rely on the 3-point shot this year. So, but that also, Joe, that makes that BYU team a danger to play because, just kind of what I was talking about back when Creighton played Nebraska. If you run into a team that, all of a sudden you're playing them one game in a single elimination tournament that's hitting their jump shots, I mean, you're out. Like there's no second chances in the NCAA tournament. So they are a team to keep an eye on. I think we both kind of thought they were going to get into Big 12 play and take some hits and probably be a middle of the pack Big 12 team. One thing I want to touch on, Yves Misi played 24 minutes in this game, 0 points and 1 rebound, and they still won this game. 15 off the bench for Langston Love, Houston transfer. I'm sure Houston might love to, that wasn't even a play on words, but I'm sure Houston might love to have him back. Yeah, I mean, I think this Baylor team, I know we're kind of saying that BYU isn't, Superman or anything, but I still think this Baylor team is kind of rounding out, coming into form. So I'm gonna put this down as a nice quality win for them. And honestly, any win that you get in the Big 12 home or away is a good one. And BYU is currently sitting at 4 in the net, so that's a pretty darn good win.
Yeah, it's going to help them out. Baylor, as you mentioned, doesn't have any losses that are past Q1, so that's going to help them out as well as they move forward. Not a lot of bad opportunities for losses in the Big 12, so they should be in. How much do I trust Baylor or BYU? Honestly, couldn't tell you at this point with Baylor's defense. And BYU, like we said, like any game they play, they could go beat someone, but they could also lose games they shouldn't lose because they're so reliant on the 3-point shot. Next one up, we have Texas A&M or Auburn. Auburn wins 66-55. This is a game where I think we see that Auburn is one of the front runners in the SEC. I mean, they've been kind of rumored as or listed as some of the odds-on favorites to win the SEC. Texas A&M had a rough start to SEC play, losing their first 2 games, and they're really not a great 3-point shooting team. Like one of the 355th in the country before this weekend. So This doesn't surprise me at all. I don't want to talk about this game too much from my end, Greg, because it's just this is more of what I expected from this particular matchup, being Auburn at home.
Right. I agree with you there. If you want to just look at this, take a big snapshot of this Auburn team, and I'll kind of focus on them. We can maybe talk about we're gonna talk about Texas A&M a little bit more when we get to what for me was the best game of the week. But I said when I watched that Baylor game early in the season, it was a neutral. I believe that was one of the games at the Pentagon, or not one of the games, but the game at the Pentagon. They gave up 88 to Baylor, and I said, man, it felt like they were playing intense defense, and still didn't. They still gave up 88. Well, they've basically given up no more than, I don't know. I'm just taking a quick look. Basically, like no more than 60 or 70 in every other game this year. I don't have a hard average in front of me. I don't have the actual number. It looks like 76 is the most points they've given up to, and that was to Indiana in December, and they put up 104 that game. So, yeah, I mean, they don't actually have any Q1 wins yet. They're going to get those opportunities. Who knows? Now that Texas A&M is back to being fully healthy, and I believe we both said I think this was Tyrese Radford's first game back from injury and first game with Texas A&M having a full roster again. So that can get kind of quirky. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for them to get some quality wins, and they don't have any yet. I think they're going to get them. I'll spare any Texas A&M talk. Again, I think we're going to have some thoughts on them coming up here in a little bit, but I think this is it's a win. I think that I still believe in Texas A&M, so I think this win is going to age well for Auburn. I don't know if it'll become a Q1, but I think this Auburn team is definitely here and ready to compete in the SEC.
Yeah, definitely with you on that one. I think they needed to figure themselves out in non-conference play. They got some freshmen who are really good, and I think they can win some big games in the SEC. I don't know if I'm necessarily picking them to win the SEC, but they're going to be a very good team under Bruce Pearl. Next one up, the last game we're going to talk about from this Tuesday, we had Purdue losing to Nebraska. This is a big win for Nebraska, 88-72. This was, for me, Greg, I'm still like, I don't think it really matters that Purdue lost this game. They're still, with how many teams lost one, and that being on the road, like, yeah, it's Nebraska. Nebraska isn't the greatest team out there. Might make the tournament, might not. We've seen Purdue lose some of these games. They lost Northwestern, too. They're still good. They're still balanced. I mean, everyone loses games. Nebraska is where I think it really means something for them, even though they did falter down the stretch this week.
Yeah, I really think that especially if you look around the just the sport as a whole, and you're just seeing all these teams get knocked off. I think it's just going to really depend on who's maybe. I don't know if I'm going to be picking a team to win the tournament that's necessarily hot, but like. I think I'm just going to be looking at, who's playing their best basketball. That piece that we used to see on an NCAA tournament resume was like, your last 10 games going into the tournament. And I'm not even necessarily saying like, if a team is 7-3, we'll be taking a magnifying glass to that and be like, who'd they play? But I'm just going to be looking when I'm filling out my bracket for, who's playing good basketball. So with the way things are going, Purdue taking this loss, I mean, it's a lot. There's more to say, I think, on the Nebraska side. This is a win that I think is really going to help them start putting a tournament resume together. I know we talked about them earlier in the year, and then they got obliterated by Creighton, and now Creighton's looking, who knows what. But I think this is just straight. I mean, if you're in the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC, I mean, this is just what conference play looks like. I'm not worried about Purdue. They only have a couple losses on the year. I still think they're a title contender. This doesn't change anything for me. It is a little scary. They gave up, 88 in regulation to Purdue, but or to Nebraska. But I'm with you on this one. It's a loss, but it's a conference loss, and I mean that's just kind of how things go.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have more losses by top teams. I do think we're starting to figure out what teams we like and what teams are going to be teams that can go far in March, but it doesn't mean they're not going to lose on the road in conference play. It's just tougher, especially teams that like in the top 5 or 10. There's a target on your back. The Purdue has a target on their back. However much they don't want to have that because they've had a target on their back in the tournament and they lose games. You have the 7'4" center and you're the number 1 team in the country. Your people are going to want to beat you, and there's some really good teams in these conferences that can get the job done. We'll move it over to Wednesday of last week, Greg. We had Mississippi State beating Tennessee. They won up pretty big early, and then they kind of hung on to win this game. We have Tennessee having issues with their offense in the first half. We kind of regressed back to the mean in terms of offense. There's some real problems with this team. You know, and we'll talk maybe. I guess we're not going to talk about it, but they did struggle on offense against Georgia later in the week, and they needed Dalton Connect to score 36 points to beat Georgia. Otherwise, they'd probably lose that game on the road. So they need to figure out that offense that we were so impressed with. Jordan Gainey needs to step up. He's not really been doing that great the last several weeks. Mississippi State, though, we had mentioned they're a tough team, and when they got Tolu Smith back, they'd be even tougher in January. Tolu Smith came back and had 23 points in this game, Greg. Tennessee still think they're again not going to overjudge them on their losses. They still have to fix that offense a little bit, but they'll still be a very good team. And Mississippi State, you're maybe not going to contend at the top of the SEC, but they are probably going to be a tournament team at this rate and probably be a decent one at that.
0-0-3-4. That is the points log in the last 4 games for Jordan Gainey. That's including the Georgia game that you just mentioned. That's not good from a guy that really early in the season was basically a double-digit contributor almost every night. And part of what made this, Tennessee. I mean, he had in the Carolina game where they put up 92. He had 11. I mean, I know that's not a ton, but he was a contributor. I don't know if Zakai Ziegler coming back from injury kind of like made him take a back seat or what, but that's a guy that when I watched them early in the year, I just kind of said, man, like he looks like he, is a contributor. And now it's just, I don't know what's going on with him. They've had some players come in and out. Toby Awaka's back now. This wasn't his first game back or anything, but he was out for a little while. Obviously, I already mentioned Ziegler. Maybe they just have some pieces to work out. I still think this is, as elite of an elite team as it can be with the way elite teams work this year. On the Mississippi State side, this is a team that, I probably should have had this on our games to pick last week. So sorry when I was going through the 107,000 games that were last week, I overlooked this one. But I had mentioned, I believe it was Mississippi State was coming off a win at I'm sorry. They were coming off a loss at South Carolina, but I was saying how stifling their defense looked. And in the first half of this game, that's really how it looked. They held Tennessee to 22 points. They did give up 50 in the second half. But the shooting for Tennessee was also just straight up better. Joe, you already mentioned Tolu Smith. There is a guy I also want to mention. Josh Hubbard's a freshman coming off the bench. It seems like he's been coming off the bench most of the year, but he's their first or second leading scorer at the moment coming off the bench. Just an interesting dynamic. 5'10", I believe they said on the broadcast. Little dude that just kind of, he just lets it fly and doesn't seem to go to the rim a ton, but it seems like he can if he's needed to. So the one thing I have to say about this team is I think they might be one scoring guard away from being a really good team. I think they're going to make some noise in the SEC, but it just seems like, okay, so they got this freshman coming off the bench, that can score some points. They got Tolu Smith back, but like, I don't know. They got Shaquille Moore is the transfer from NC State. DJ Jeffries transferred from Memphis. There's some names on this team, but I just don't think there's, kind of that tertiary huge scoring threat that would make this team like a threat to, be a top 3, top 5 team in the SEC. I think they're going to make some noise, but I don't think we're going to be sitting here saying, is Mississippi State going to win the SEC? I think they're just one scoring option away from that.
Yeah, you mentioned Hubbard. He and Reed Shepherd and Rob Dillingham leading the SEC in bench points this year. Going to be a lot of fun conversations about all SEC freshman teams and all that stuff, and could be some guys off the bench who are making that. But yeah, they're not quite that good, but they're going to give some of the top teams trouble, and they should be a tournament team, and they'll be one to watch because I do think the SEC is a league that is very, very good this year. Moving on, Greg, we had Kansas losing on the road to UCF, and this is what the new Big 12 might look like. We have Kansas on the road at UCF. Never thought I'd see the day that would be a thing in January. For Kansas, we have the same issues. 3-point shooting. They did shoot 33%, which is not their worst outing they've had. But Elmarco Jackson plays 22 minutes and has 0 points. They were outshot by UCF in terms of number of field goals taken. That shouldn't happen when you have the more athletic team and you have guys like Hunter Dickinson and Kevin McCullar, as I'm saying it more fun this time. But they also had turnovers, way too many turnovers, 18 turnovers in this game. Credit to UCF. They're not a team who's going to make the tournament. They're going to have to go on a big run to do it. But Kansas's issues flashed here, and what we've talked about all season is the same. So I'll leave it at that. That's what happened. It's just they're going to lose to bad teams if they can't hit threes. So if they can't get a scoring punch outside of Dickinson and McCullough.
Yeah, man, I feel like there's an echo in here because it's like this Kansas team that we've seen all year. They are who we thought they were. Uh, Interestingly, they did get some bench scoring. Johnny Furphy gives them 9. Nick Timberlake, who I feel like we've mentioned, gives them 5. I mean, they got a few points off the bench. I don't want to say more than they usually get, but um, I feel like every time I look at a Kansas box score, it's like McCullough for 20, Dickinson for 18, and like KJ Adams for 15 or something like that. And that's like 75% of their scoring. And there's a couple points here and there. Elmarco Jackson putting up that's a 22 trillion, right? Because no rebounds, no assists, no nothing, just 3 fouls. I don't know if do fouls count. Do you not get a Mark Titus special trillion if you have fouls? I don't know the ins and outs of the stat, but that's a guy whose name we've brought up this year, man. That it's just been like this was part of why this team was supposed to be elite, and they still are. They still are a top 10 team, probably a top 5 team. But the thing for UCF, man, it's their very first. I believe it was their very first Big 12 game, and you beat Kansas. I know it was at home, but you take that every day of the week. I believe the only other time I had paid attention to UCF this year, I believe they lost to Ole Miss when Ole Miss was still undefeated. So I don't think this is a tournament team. I mean, this is good for them, nice win, but like outside of this win, they have nothing. I think this is just going to be one of those flash in the pan type deals, and just part of on the Kansas side, just part of Big 12 play. But Joe, you got any additional thoughts on this one?
No, Bill Self had mentioned that he is happy with how his team's played, but they need to play better on a podcast this week, I believe. Mentioned they were good, not great. They're not at a championship level, and I think people should take that into account until we see changes from guys like Elmarco Jackson, or even the three-point shooting as a whole, or DeJuan Harris scoring more. As well as as good as he is as a point guard, got to score some more. Then we should take it as what it is. They're a good, not great team. Maybe they make the Sweet 16, but I would not have much faith in them doing much more than that. Let's go to Louisville beating Miami in one of the more head-scratching results of the college basketball calendar. Louisville moves to 6-9 on the season. Miami 11-4, and really just makes you wonder what's going on. This game was, I think, mostly won by Mike James with 26 points and Braden Huntley Hatfield with 22 for Louisville. No one else really did much. There was 13 points off the bench. There was a decent amount of points off the bench, but Miami. This is one you can't lose. This is one I think it's fair to say that inside they got beat, and that's something that Miami's gonna have to deal with. Something we talked about last week as well, Greg.
Yeah, Miami later in the week goes on and beats Virginia Tech in I guess a get right game. But this is a team that there was the Kentucky game early in the year, and we said, man, what a win for Kentucky, and then kind of just as the year's gone on, we've been like, they got demolished by Colorado, and we just kind of started saying, well, are they good? And I know we both, well, not we both, I'll give you more of the credit. You've talked about how good North Shadow Mirror is, and I mean, I think that still stands, but it's time to start thinking about this team as maybe missing the tournament, which is wild considering where they were, early in the season, and not even just saying that they were a top 25 team, but just some of the names that are still on the team between Wooga Poplar and Nigel Pack and North Shadow Mir. There's some guys on this team. This team should be competing, and I would worry about. I mean, their best wins right now are Clemson, who we'll get to, and Virginia Tech, and now they got a Q4 loss to Louisville, which is still wild to me to look at a resume and see a power conference game be a Q4 loss, but that's where Louisville's at right now. So I don't know that this is an anomaly. I think Miami is just struggling right now.
Yeah, they're definitely struggling right now. They've had some decent wins, but even their wins we got to look at too, Greg. I mean, they beat Clemson. How much does that mean now? I mean, let's just go right into Clemson too. Clemson loses to Virginia Tech. Clemson is frauds. I mean, maybe not frauds because we were the ones saying that. But watch out for that Brad Brownell downturn. They're not that good. They have talent, but like this is what always happens. It's fair to mention they have talent talent on this team, PJ Hall, Chase Hunter, and everything, but it's the same as ever, and it's not like the ACC is all that tough in comparison to past years.
Yeah, Joe, I think it's worth noting Clemson still sits at 28 in the net. That would probably, as it's like if the schedule were to end today, that would probably be like the best net to get left out of the tournament. So I don't think like if the selection show was tomorrow that they'd get left out, but I think it's trending that way. You know, they've got a win over Bama, who again the net loves. They've got a win over Pitt and a win over TCU that's aging really well. Just TCU looks like they're putting some stuff together, but I don't know, man. It's just this feels like same old, same old. Heard this story before. You know, we talked about them last week. They only put up 55 at Carolina, and yeah, that Carolina defense has been pretty good, but I don't know, man. I feel like, you know, fool me once, fool me twice, you know, fool me 6, 7, 8. I don't know how long's he been there. 14 years now, something like that. It's just it just feels like a broken record at this point.
Oh, it definitely is. It seems like they care more about football to really care what's going on with basketball, and maybe you're happy with, you know, making a tournament every 10 years or something. But it's got to change. I mean, they have talent. He's getting talent. It's just not working out for him. So Virginia Tech gets a win there. That's huge for them as well. Next game up, staying in the ACC, North Carolina beats NC State. This one, I'll threaten to take away Greg's outline powers after this one. I don't know why we picked it. I don't know why we're talking about it too much, but North Carolina killed NC State because NC State's bad. They're not good.
Yeah, Joe threatened to make me get a Tar Hole tattoo on my forehead if North Carolina lost this game. I think I just said, hey, in-state rivalry. Yeah, NC State's got an inflated record, but you never know what could happen. And Joe was right. We probably knew what was going to happen in this game. So mea culpa. I was just trying to pick out a game that, you know, had some spice to it, and maybe we'd look smart if all of a sudden we came back here this week and said, you know, Wolfpack win and are all of a sudden on the map. No, yeah, that's not what happened here. Another game for this Tar Heels defense. Just that's not what I thought we'd be talking about. You know, I thought there, you know, we'd be talking about more of their offense and you know, kind of the options and the efficiency. And here we are, and it's been like 3-4 straight games that I think they've given up less than 60. So good for them. You know, the North Carolina looks like they're kicking on or firing on all cylinders. And I know it's a little bit of a weak ACC, but it's still a power conference. And, you know, look around the nation. Anybody would take, you know, in conference win any day of the week, just because of some of these other results we're seeing.
Like a lot of the other teams in this world, Greg had a bad week. He's going to rebound. He left Tennessee, Mississippi State off, and he added North Carolina State. But it's okay. We'll bounce back. We'll do better. I messed up last week too. I'd mentioned Hilton Magic being overblown, and I still think it might be. I think Iowa State's just good, but that's whatever. But I also said Butler I didn't think was very good, and I appreciated how they beat the teams they should beat and then lose the games they should lose. Well, that all flipped on its head this week too. Butler beats Marquette 69-62. They need to start. I mean, Butler, they're a team where they might make the tournament. They can play, like, they had been playing some of the best teams in the conference tough, right? But they weren't getting the wins. This is a good win to have. Marquette, we need to start having a dialogue about them because, you know, thinking of possible top 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, possible Tyler Kolek running back Big East Player of the Year, possible first run in the tournament for Shaka Smart since VCU days. That's in question now. Tyler Kolek played 32 minutes and had 2 points. This is awful. Like, this, again, I'm going to say it again. He should have never won Big East Player of the Year last year. It should have been Bryce Hopkins or Sule Boom. He won Marquette won the Big East regular season, so they gave it to him. 1 of 13 shooting. Like, what are we doing? Stop shooting the ball, man, or take him out. You have to figure something out. Cam Jones did have 20 points, but this is an embarrassing performance, not because they lost to Butler, but they're at home and they have this type of performance from their best player, and then they just can't get bailed out. This is like one of the things that makes me think, like, hey, Marquette last year good, this year have a lot of the same players. Can we figure it out? Are they a top 25 team? Like, what's going on? The last 2 weeks they're not a top 25 team, Greg.
Yeah, and I believe they got some bad news this week as well. Was it Sean Jones is done for the year? I know there was, yes. Sean Jones, done for the rest of 23-24. I'm looking at, I remembered seeing a Rothstein tweet this week.
Mm-hmm.
Towards ACL. I think they may have had one other injury. I'm not gonna deep dive into that and have terrible podcasting. So they definitely look vulnerable. And just from that point, Joe, I'll come to your defense a little bit on this Butler team, because I did have that Butler UConn game on our picks the week prior to this. And you had kind of said, I don't think there's any way this game is close. Well, Butler plays UConn close, but it's at a time when we saw UConn was vulnerable. They were going through some, they were going through some injuries and getting back to being healthy. And as we've already seen with Texas A&M, that can really affect the team's chemistry and whatnot. Okay, so now Butler's best win is Marquette, but Marquette at a time where we're already saying, what the heck is Marquette? I honestly, looking at Butler's resume, their best win might be Texas Tech, who seems like they might be stringing a little bit of something together over there with Grant McCaslin in his first year. I got one of their games that I think we'll be picking one of their games this week. But Butler is like they're on the map, like they're at the edge of the radar. But like I'm with you, we're not ready to just say this is a tournament team or anything like that. But I mean, this is one of those teams I would probably throw in there. 62 in the net. If they're playing a Big East game on Tuesday or Wednesday, we're not going to pick it unless it's we're not picking any of their games this week. But they're just a team worth watching, just to have kind of your eye on and say, if they get another one of these, even if it's a questionable result, any good win in the Big East is still, I mean, that might start putting them in the conversation.
Yeah, definitely might. And you're right. It's definitely a team worth watching in the Big East. A lot of Big East games this year are going to be worth watching, based on just conference being like a lot of fun to watch. One of the best in the country, top to bottom, have a good balance of who can beat who. So yeah, Butler's good to watch. I don't know if they'll make the tournament, but Marquette definitely has his issues to figure out and soon. Oklahoma suffered a loss to TCU on Tuesday. TCU wins 80-71. We were kind of unsure about this TCU team to start the season. They had lost a lot of talent, including Eddie Lampkin over to Colorado, although he didn't play at the end of last year either. They had some of their all-time, great players last year move on, and they are still good. Emmanuel Miller, 27 points, 9 rebounds. I don't know. I think they're a team that could push for the tournament. It's a good win. They still have to put some nice things together here because the non-conference wasn't as good as you would hope, but a good win for them. And Oklahoma, rough week for them.
Yeah, Joe, on the TCU side, I think we had brought them up for some reason maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was kind of like I'm still kind of out on them. I think I had asked a question like, do you have any opinion on this team? We were like, maybe we talked about it. Maybe it was literally last week when they had that weird ending to the Kansas game, that they darn near won that game. Joe, there's just a couple other names on this team. I mean, I know you and I both like Avery Anderson. Goodness gracious, the alliteration throwing me off. Avery Anderson when he was over at Oklahoma State. They got Chuck O'Bannon Jr. They got Jameer Nelson Jr. Just some names that we recognize. And I mean, they got 24 points off the bench in this game. I'm pretty sure most teams in the country would take. I'm sorry, not 24. 28 points off the bench in this game. 2 double-digit scores off the bench. Pretty much any team in the country would take that. This team looks like they're going to compete. I guess we can, slightly touch on. They go on later in the week to beat Houston. So, and I know Houston maybe took a little bit of a beating this week, but still, I mean, this team looks good. On the Oklahoma side, Joe, it's weird to like see a team in the top 10 and just be like, I have no idea what they are. Like, not a clue. I like, if you made me pick like which team do I think is going to get a higher seed in the tournament in this particular game, at this point, like I might be inclined to pick TCU, which is weird because you're looking at Oklahoma with a single digit number next to their name in the regular season, but and I know I've got a little bit of a more context seeing TCU go on to beat Houston in the week later in the week, but I don't, and maybe I just need to put more Oklahoma games on my radar to watch. But man, I don't know. What do you think?
Oklahoma's a tough one to figure out for me too. I mean, they do have some nice wins out of conference, but a lot of them aren't going to be remembered that way, or maybe they thought they would be good wins, but end up not being good wins. Like they beat Iowa in the San Diego Invitational, they beat USC. You know, both those wins don't really mean as much as maybe past years, or maybe as much as we thought with USC. They beat Providence. Now, that one's going to look a whole lot worse at the end of the season now that Bryce Hopkins out. They beat Arkansas. Still don't know what the heck Arkansas is doing this year. Musselman has to like do what he usually does, which is get them to an 8 seed in the tournament, and then they win a couple games, and everyone thinks that he's amazing because that's how that works. Um, and then they lose these two tough games. We'll talk about the other one later on. Yeah, I think the bad non-conference schedule, while that wasn't like their intent to have a bad non-conference schedule, I think it does play a factor in why we don't know this team. It's not just that we haven't had a chance to see them as much, but it's also just like you have to play good games to figure out what you're all about. There's some teams in this list that played some tough games, played in some tough environments, that have done it before. We found out a lot more about them. So through these games, we'll find out more about them. I'm with you. I think Oklahoma might be a team that like ends up closer to an 8 or a 9 seed. The start to the season helps them out, but again, like beating Providence is going to mean a whole lot. Well, their resume is going to get worse just because of that. It's going to get a whole lot worse based on the Bryce Hopkins injury.
Am I right though that it's weird to look at a team and say like they have a single digit next to their name in the AP poll and like feel like almost in a couple of weeks will be like, yeah, this is maybe a 7, 8, 9 seed.
No, it's not crazy at all, and I think it does lead to the fact of like winning games is important, but we should really be factoring in what these teams have done, and you know that's why we had talked about Michigan State last week, Greg, of like why are people pushing to get this team ranked? They haven't done anything, but it's that's what happens in the AP. People are lazy. They see a bunch of wins in a row. Doesn't matter who it's against, and they put them in there. And I think that's what hurt Oklahoma more than anything. And the national perception of like, oh, they're ninth in the country, they don't deserve it. No, they didn't deserve it, but they probably deserved to be like 20 or something. I don't know. And that's they still had a rough week, but it was a tough week of games too. So it's going to happen to a lot of teams. All right, so the last one we'll talk about from last Wednesday, Colorado and Cal. Cal wins 82-78. That was their 6th win of the season. So not a very good start for Cal this year. Colorado's the team I think we're getting at here, Greg. They have some good talent at the top, but they are not deep. They are four-player team, and that's good because you can get 4 players scoring points, and that's awesome. But you can't count on bench points almost at all with this team.
And remember, this is a team that I said, man, there's a lot of talent on this team, and they're pretty good. And yeah, they've dealt with some injuries, but then last week, we've got the Arizona State and who else did they lose? They had another. I'm looking at their thing, and last week we talked about that. Oh, they got blown out by Arizona, and yes, I know there was some injuries in that game, but. They still only it was a 47-point margin. Now they go and lose to Cal, who just has been a bad program. And Joe, I actually yesterday they were down like 10 to USC, so they came back and won that game. But this is a team that like I feel like I've said this about like 5 or 6 teams, but like if I look up and I'm a 1 seed and this team is sitting on the 8 or 9 line below me, like I'm peeved. Like, but that's I am worried about this team making the tournament if they take some more losses. I think they would probably make it, if the selection show was tomorrow, but so I don't want to say like, they're going to be on the 8-9 line and somebody's going to be mad, but they've got some work to do. That's for sure. But they're not doing themselves any favors right now.
I think they're out. If it was ended right now, I do. They're 0-2 in quad 1, 4-2 in quad 2, 1-1 in quad 3. I mean, you look at teams who are even lower in the net. I mean, Memphis is lower in the net, so they're going to be jumped in that. Even someone who's like, I think Miami is a team that's kind of like similarly placed to them, which is funny based on the fact that they played. But 2-3 in the quad one, and then they have the 7-1 in quad four. Like that's something you have to consider. Ole Miss is 1-1 quad one, and then they undefeated the rest of the way. They're 57 in the net. I think they're out. They have to do a lot of damage in the Pac-12, and the unfortunate part is we talked about like UCLA, USC being down. It's not a lot of chances for good wins for them. It sucks that they have that much talent, but you got to put it together. And some guys who have to contribute who aren't the stars on the team, and that just hasn't been happening. Let's move it on to Thursday. We have we're not going to talk about. It was a fun day of basketball, not a light schedule, but Illinois beat Michigan State. Not going to talk about that one. We kind of expected it. It was a good game, but we'll move on to we have FAU and Tulane. Tulane should have won this game. Watched it live. Tulane had a pretty good game down the stretch, hitting a bunch of threes. Florida Atlantic just looked like they were going through the motions. Their players had mentioned in the broadcast of this game, like, they were mentioning how the players just couldn't get up for a lot of these conference games, which is weird because they moved up in conference. It's all new. You would think that they'd be ready to get up for these games. Not the case. They have a horrendous foul call at the end of the game. Well, there's some officials that we won't name names, but who are doing this game that gave them the win, basically. They escaped with the win.
You can name names.
It's Doug Schau. It's my favorite referee in the whole world. 85-84, they get the win, and that's not too encouraging. Now we're recording this early this week. We have a possible podcast game we're attending. We'll talk about later, but this they play on Sunday. Recording Sunday, they play a UAB. There's not much faith that's being instilled with FAU, and I do think it's a lot about getting up for these games. They have the talent, they're just not showing it.
It's really weird every time I look at this resume and I open it up and you look at I always look at Q1 first. That's just where my eyes go first. You see the Arizona win, you see the Texas A&M win, which I think is also going to age. I think Texas A&M is going to round back into form. This darn near Tulane loss. They lost to Charlotte last week, so we talked about them. There is a change in their resume, Joe. Bryant is now a Q3, and that's just worth noting because I believe we had said that they were like the only whatever team that had 2 Q4 losses. So they are big Bryant fans, and that is one of the reasons that FAU is still 23rd in the net is because it seems like the rest of their opponents are doing them favors. So it's just a weird. I know it feels like we're doing the same thing with them and Marquette, where it's like, yeah, they just brought everybody back, and like we expected them to be maybe not the same. Year to year, there's definitely differences, and the roster's a little bit different, but it almost feels like the same story with both of these teams, where it was like they just aren't what we expected them to be, and it feels even more strange when we look at FAU and we say, well, they aren't what they were supposed to be when they have an Arizona win on their resume. I just they keep doing this. They keep flirting with danger. I'm worried about this team. And the funny thing is the very next game we're going to talk about is another team that they're both worried about. But trying to put my thoughts in a box on this team is impossible for me right now.
Yeah, I think the only thing that can answer it is time, right? Like I mentioned, they play UAB today. Bryant could go back to being a quad 4 loss like this, like nothing happened. So losing to UAB would suck. I mean, they're right around 100, I think, in the net. So they have to figure this thing out, and they have to figure out fast, because those 2 quad 1 wins, they sure mean a lot right now. But if you have 3 quad 3 losses at the end of the year or something like that, that's going to matter. So probably going to get in. But I do think about, Greg, how tough it is to have a team like that and then repeat. I know, Davidson with Steph Curry's run had that Elite 8 run and everything. The next year, they didn't make the tournament. They won the NIT. And yes, I think there was more players lost. They had Jason Richards, who was one of the all-time assist leaders in the NCAA. And they had a center, I think Thomas Sander, who was actually from Cincinnati, Ohio, Elder High School. To shout out local high school here. But they lost some guys, but everyone's figuring, oh, you'll make it back. You'll be fine. You were 10 seed last year, and Steph will get better, and no one can stop them, and they got stopped. So it's going to be tough. They're going to be a target on their back in a new conference and everything, and they're going to have to step up big time here soon. But you mentioned the other team, Greg. Gonzaga loses at Santa Clara. We brought this up at the end of last week. I was not going to pick Gonzaga to lose this game, But I was going to say, just watch out. If they lose this one, it gets dicey. It's getting dicey. Santa Clara gets a game winner from Adama Ball. They have some pretty good talent on this team. The WCC is deeper than many people think every year. They're like about the fourth best team, like I mentioned last year, behind San Francisco and St. Mary's and Gonzaga as well. They're in this small gym where it's all packed, and Gonzaga crumples and get under the pressure here. And I think part of it, Greg, is the lack of depth we talked about. They played 7 players in this game. Anton Watson scored 32 points. Ryan Emhart scored 21. Huff off the bench scored 14. No one else was in double figures. So when you only play 7, that's tough. And on top of it, during the game, Watson is visibly having his hands on his knees because he is tired and he is gassed. He went 14 of 18 from the field, and he just runs out of gas at the end. So the concerns are still there. I still think they can make the tournament. I still think they can be fine. You're going to lose some tough games on the road in conference, but then you might need to win, at San Francisco, at St. Mary's now, which is something they maybe didn't think they had to do a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, definitely make sure if you haven't already, check out Joe's Twitter, not just for his other content with football, but and it should be, I don't know which way it'll be, but look under him when this video posts. His Twitter will be under it. But Joe mentioned he mentioned that Adama Ball was having a good week, and I literally watch this sport not for a living, and that's a name that I hadn't even heard until I saw a couple of things that Joe posted about him this week, and I know we talked about this game, we mentioned this game last week. Joe, I mean, all right, Gonzaga, you gotta pick right now today, in or out. And I'm not saying let me clarify. Not saying in or out based on the resume today. I'm saying where on Selection Sunday are we going to be talking about with this team?
In, because I think they win the West Coast Conference, but at large is going to be tough now.
And that's fair. And that's why I wanted to frame the question like that, because I think this team is probably going to win the WCC tournament. It is worth noting, I'm gonna whisper this. St. Mary's has had some pretty good results lately, dare I say. They absolutely obliterated it. I don't have the result in front of me, but they gave up 49 to a team this week. And it's not worth having on our radar. It's just like them and San Francisco and obviously Santa Clara are really Gonzaga's their only competition to win the league. And they'll only have to face one of those teams because I'm assuming they're still going to end up with how weak the WCC is. They had that weird bracket. I'm assuming Gonzaga is basically going to only have to play 2 games. If they take some more losses between now and then, it might be a different story. And it's going to be interesting next year. Joe, I don't know if we touched on this on the pod, but Oregon State and Washington State are going to be joining the WCC just for basketball. And that they've already said that the tournament, the conference tournament is going to change a little bit. Kind of a bummer for Gonzaga, when they might be looking, down at the moment. I don't think they have anybody committed next year. I think I heard that somewhere else, Joe. I don't think they have any recruits committed for next year. This is just weird. Is there any chance that Mark Few's got a foot out the door? And I don't mean for another team. Is he ready to hang in? This is based on nothing. There is I am not reporting anything, nothing. I'm just it just almost feels strange. It's got that weird feel to it. We almost have that Jay Wright thing where we just get this tweet in the middle of the off season. It's Mark Few is retired. It feels like it comes out of nowhere, but when we start looking at things in context, it's well, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's maybe the new NIL stuff and transfer portal stuff. They've benefited from the transfer portal. I mean, it's probably shouldn't even have Ryan Emhart if he made maybe a better decision, or maybe it's a good decision for him. I don't know, but you think about Jay Wright left the game because of that too. He's working at a private school. Villanova's had success. It's going to be different when you have people paying money to players basically to play basketball, where they can't maybe compete with the Blue Bloods anymore. It's going to be a lot more time investment too to recruit transfer portal. It's obviously not as bad as football where you have to recruit the whole roster, 53, 80, 85 guys or scholarship guys. But I do think that maybe not his foot is out the door because he planned it that way, but I think it's out the door because of what's happened. 0 commits next year, like you said. They've had all these talks of joining new conferences that they need to do, but they won't do. The travel sucks, but the TV contract money can help with that. The travel sucks for some other maybe this other sports can join other conferences, closer to them. to make it more affordable. But it's yeah, there's like, what's the future of this team? Like, there's the recruiting isn't great right now. The conference isn't great. Better than expected, but not like at a point where Gonzaga was one of the top teams in the country every year, one of the top programs, and now it's like they will slowly look like they're fading back to obscurity. And Mark Few, I would trust to figure it out. But if I'm him, I'm sitting there like, I've had all these job offers forever. Why not take one? Like, why not go? Why not go to a team in a big conference who needs a coach? Like, why not go to Washington next year? Mike Hopkins might not be there. Like, it's close enough, and that's just one of those things. I think you're right. I think it's something to watch out for based on the situation.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're just reading the tea leaves. Like, this is not like we've heard anything. Like, Joe, I don't know if you have any insider information. I certainly don't. This is just, we are looking top down. What does the situation look like? And maybe saying what kind of choices could he make? Purely speculation. So we're not breaking any news here.
Nope, not breaking any news. Just speculating on where they're at as a team in a program right now. They will need Graham Ike to stop getting in foul trouble. That's going to be huge for them if they have limited depth. That can't happen. And Dusty Stromer, 0 field goals made. Can't have that happen either, especially when you have those creators, Nemhard and Hickman, setting you up for good shots. So let's get to Saturday, Greg. We have a lot to go over here, too. We have Oklahoma and Kansas. Kansas does rebound and win this game. Hunter Dickinson, huge game, 24 points, 14 rebounds, and 5 blocks. We already talked about Oklahoma. We don't know how to figure them out. This game did not help me figure them out at all. Kansas, again, sometimes there are issues will flash, sometimes they won't. When they have good games from their big guys, that'll help them out a lot when they're playing some of these better teams.
Yeah, one interesting little note, Joe. I didn't even notice this. This game ended up on ESPN Plus, which I feel like happens weirdly with some big. I mean, like, this is a top 10 Big 12 matchup, and just for some reason, and this is not the first time this has happened. Ends up on ESPN Plus. I was lucky enough to be at my brother-in-law's. Got 2 TVs, so I had this game on, and I can't even remember whatever other game was on this window. But this game was on the second TV. Johnny Furphy in the starting lineup instead of Omarco Jackson. Just so maybe Bill Self is starting to toy with stuff and say, okay, we had a loss earlier this week. What can I do? What can I change? They only get 4 points off the bench, but I just wonder if inserting Furphy into that lineup maybe gave them a little bit of a different look. It's still a 3-man team, and Dickinson, McCullough, and Adams. And Joe, what did I say? Like, not but 15 minutes ago, 24 from Dickinson, 21 from McCullough, and 15 from KJ Adams. And like, it's, those aren't the numbers I use, but like, it's basically what we usually see from this team. So, going to give it to Kansas. It's a good win for them. It's definitely one they love having under their belt. They don't care what Oklahoma's situation is. On paper, it's going to look good. So, yeah, it's a good win for them. Oklahoma, what do they got on their schedule coming up? Is there going to be, kind of a defining game coming up? I'm pulling it up right now. They got West Virginia, Cincinnati, Texas Tech. I mean, like, I feel like if they lose this week, because West Virginia just beat Texas. We'll talk about that in a second, not at length, but and then UC's kind of been, they've been a team that's kind of messed around and had a couple of close games, and they beat BYU earlier in the year in their Big 12 debut. But this is one of those situations where I feel like if they were to like lose both of those games, they would find themselves, first of all, probably outside of the top 25 if they were to lose both of those games. Those are their 2 games this week. And then I don't know where they'd be at on a tournament standpoint. We would just have to see what the numbers look like. But that, I think, is going to tell us more than playing a good team. And, it's like playing a good team like Kansas and losing doesn't really tell us. I feel like it kind of tells us what we already know about Oklahoma. They're not elite. I think we kind of already knew that, regardless of the number next to their name. But when they play the teams that they're supposed to beat, I think it's kind of like that time will tell that you already mentioned about. I think you were talking about maybe it was Oklahoma. All this stuff that we're talking about is running together at this point. But I think that kind of thing, when they play teams that they're supposed to beat, that's going to be that time will tell, measure and tell us what they actually are. Hopefully. they split them, and if they split these games, then it's going to be like, oh, now I don't know what to think.
Liked your point about Furphy in the starting lineup. They need it because they need to stretch the floor and open things up for Dickinson and McCullough. Um, this I mentioned I think a month ago on the podcast, Greg. This Kansas team is just Kentucky from last year. That's all it is. They don't have a guy who can scare you and get to the basket in terms of like an NBA guard. They don't have the shooting to stretch the floor. They have one or two shooters who can do a good job. They have a paint clogger in Dickinson who's very, very good, just like Oscar Tshiebwe was. But it's not going to be good for new era college basketball. So they can do what Kentucky did. They can have good seasons. Like Kentucky was a 6 seed last year, and they had some injuries that kind of led them to be a 6 seed. They can be a 2 seed the year before. But when it comes to crunch time in the tournament, and you can't hit threes, and the paint is clogged, and you have nowhere to go, if McCullough and Dickinson are shut down, where do you go? Like KJ Adams is a guy who dunks the ball, not much of an offensive skill set. Who's going to be the guy? Is it Furphy hitting threes? Is it Harris going to have? I mean, he had that one good game against Kentucky. He has not done anything offensively since. I don't think he's even had maybe one or two double-digit scoring games since. Marco Jackson hasn't done anything, so Bill Self is going to get a lot of hate because this team is not going to win. I think he should be getting a lot of credit because they are winning in a way that is just not college basketball anymore. And he'll get it fixed, just like Kyle Perry got it fixed this year. He'll get it fixed, but this is not going to be a Kansas team that repeats. This is not a team I think either of us are really picking maybe past the Sweet 16. We'll see what happens. It's just one of those things to consider. They shot 20% from three in this game. The Furphy addition is going to help things out by stretching the floor. How much does it help it out? I have no idea. He's got to hit some big shots. Next one up, we actually have Kentucky and Texas A&M. This was a absolute bruising game, absolute dogfight. Kentucky loses this one in overtime to Texas A&M, 97-92. Texas A&M specifically is on the boards. They have a lot of offensive rebounds that helps them get the win. Typical of a Buzz Williams coach team. It's a lot of a mindset thing. But have to give credit to Texas A&M. They shot 37.5% from three after being, as I mentioned earlier, the 355th ranked team in three-point shooting over the whole year. That's stepping up to the big moment. Wade Taylor had 31 points. This is... I don't think I think any less of Kentucky due to this game. I think the perimeter defense needs to be tuned up a little bit. But you go up against a team who shot that well and hadn't been shooting that well, and you arguably should have won the game in regulation based on a BS goaltend call that is a rule, and the officials got it right, just kind of screwed him over. You had them right there. So I think it was a good experience for them. I think Kentucky's going to be better because of this, because they had to play a game where, there were some times guys got barely breathed on and there was a foul called. And there was other times where guys got tackled and nothing was called. So this is what they're going to need in March. There's not going to be consistent officiating. There's going to be teams who try to beat them up, and a game that sucks to lose, but they needed this one, I think.
Yeah, it is. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this in particular, but it is unfortunate that the officiating did play a factor in this game. But regardless of that, this felt like a heavyweight title fight. I'm not even going to look at resumes when I'm talking about this. Felt like two elite teams. And again, I know if we look at Texas A&M's resume and say, wow, they're 10-6, this feels like, okay, they're finally healthy. This is the team that they can be. They feel like they're better than the team, Joe, that we saw when we went to Ohio State, when we went to Columbus to see them play. They only got 4 points from Henry Coleman. Just interesting. But it just felt like, especially just down the stretch, at the end of regulation and overtime, it was a Wade Taylor three, and then a Radford three, and then a Dillingham three. And I need someone to explain to me how Reed Shepherd only had 13 points, because maybe it was just that every three that he hit was, at a critical moment in the game, and then he had a couple of steals that really came in handy for UK to keep them in the game and whatnot and keep the game close. But this felt like, I know some people hate using this trope, but this felt like an Elite Eight game. It really did, and I think that's where Texas A&M is going to be. Their record doesn't show it right now, but this win is going to carry weight because they're good. They're probably a top 5, top 10 team. And I think Texas A&M, as long as they stay healthy, that's the asterisk we got to put on it. As long as they can continue to stay healthy, I think they're going to make some noise in the SEC and do some damage, but they got to stay healthy. But man, this was just it was a fun game to watch. I was, like I already said, I was with my brother-in-law this weekend, who's also a Kentucky fan. And, we're rolling all over the floor, just at every shot that goes in and whatnot. But just just some good, fun basketball. Again, side note on the officiating, hate that it affected the game, but you're right. That's sometimes how these games are called in March. So
One more point here I'll make, Greg. I just love the makeup of this Kentucky team in more ways than one because they can throw so many looks at you. So, like you said, Reed Shepard was still efficient in this game, 3 of 5, but against Texas A&M teams, you're not going to get easy baskets. You're not like you need someone who can create shots. So what happens here? Rob Dillingham goes off. I mean, 6 of 15 shooting, but what's that? Still 40%. So that's still okay. But he has some of those big threes, and you have DJ Wagner in this game who played really well. 18 points and gets to the basket. Like the guys who needed to create their own shots and create for others did. Shepard was there to hit shots when he needed to. Antonio Reeves was there to hit shots when he needed to. These guards and how they're different is going to be so impressive. So I know we talked earlier in the year, Reed Shepard, like best player, best freshman, whatever. When you have a dogfight like this, sometimes you need guys like DJ Wagner. So I'm glad that a lot of UK fans saw that. He is still a very good player. He can get to the basket. There were some things that maybe you want to fix with him. Maybe shooting threes not so well. Some turnovers in overtime or at the end of regulation that really hurt them. But that's why I love this team more than anything. And then even with the big guys too, Ugo Onyenso, 7 points, 10 rebounds, 5 blocks that really helped things too. And Bradshaw, who was in foul trouble all game long. Again, officiating was tough. He played 4 fouls in 6 minutes. I mean, that's hard to do. So we'll just leave it at that. But and even Trey Mitchell had a bad game, but he was still tough in the middle at the 4 spots. So good for them. We'll see if they can get back on track. Good game to experience for both teams. Next one up, you mentioned we're not going to talk about this one too long, but Texas lost to West Virginia. We already talked about Texas's struggles. We don't know what they're doing. West Virginia, 6 wins on the season. Tough role for Josh Eilert to be stuck into with players transferring out so late, with Bobby Huggins, still being around but not part of the program. It's good for him to get a good win. That's what I'll say about this. I think it's good for him to get a good win, but I'm not going to talk too much more about Texas when we already talked about them.
Yeah, Texas, I think they're just gonna kind of fall off. I think we already talked about this this week. Because we already talked about the Texas UC game. Again, just reiterate the same point. They're 2 Max Asmus buzzer beaters away from probably not even being in the conversation. They're currently sitting at 59 in the net. So their best win is Cincinnati. So Joe, if Colorado's out, this team's got to be, which is weird because we're coming off a week where they were 25th in the net. They're 25th in the AP poll, and now we're like they're probably out. They're going to have a lot. Now the good news is they're in the Big 12, so pretty much every day you're going to have a chance to make some noise and boost your resume. I mean, that's all I got to say about them. But I feel like, Joe, we've already said this about the same. We were both just kind of like, look, you just kind of look at them and you're like, I know Rodney Terry is doing his best there, trying to step in, and of course he's the permanent coach now. But I mean, it's just they've definitely taken a step back.
Definitely have, and like we already mentioned, like they're just what they have to do is just win games in the Big 12. If they do that, they'll be fine. If they don't, they won't be. So we'll see how that goes. Pac-12 drama here, Greg. Arizona loses to Washington State. Now, Washington State's not as bad as some of the other teams we mentioned on the pod. Like, they have 12 wins. It's not like they're a 6-win Cal team or anything like that. But still surprising game. Caleb Love really keeps them in this, 10 of 25 shooting. It's not the most efficient game, but when you get 0 points from Kylan Boswell, that's going to hurt. When you get Pale Larson giving you 9 points on 4 of 10 shooting, you need someone to shoot the shots. He did. I'll defend him again. But really, this was just a bad game by the other guards, and Washington State took advantage. So not going to talk too much about Washington State's not going to make the tournament. Another Arizona down performance. This is going to make March fun because at times Arizona looks like the best team in the country. At times they look like they can lose to anyone, and that's what happened.
Yeah, but I feel like we say that they look like they could lose to anyone, but I feel like we say that other teams. I mean, we just talked about Purdue losing to Nebraska. Like, this feels like it's in the same vein as that. Like, Nebraska maybe is a little bit closer to a tournament team than Washington State is, and I think if Washington State, it's just because of the Pac-12, Washington State, you're probably right. They're probably not a tournament team. If they were in a stronger conference, I mean, their best wins right now are all in the Pac-12. They've got an Arizona win. They've got a USC win, and both of those wins. Well, the Arizona win is good. The USC win we don't think is any good, regardless of what it says on paper. But yeah, I mean, this is just conference play for Arizona. So, but it's happening to other teams. They're not no one is immune. They're not the only team that this is happening to. You just got to keep on trucking. You're going to take these lumps in conference play. It does look a little bit weird when you got the Stanford loss as well, which was somewhat recent, and you got this loss. I mean, they were 2 weeks apart, but still, just games they shouldn't be losing. Maybe Washington State is better than Stanford, and it was away, so there's something to be said about that. But I just, if Arizona wants to be a 1 or a 2 seed, probably don't want to lose a ton of these games. This is, I don't want to say an acceptable loss, but it's fine as long as you don't put two or three of these strung together.
Yeah, I mean, Arizona's a tournament team. It's not like they're going to be down on the bubble anytime soon. It's just ones you would like to have. And you mentioned it's conference play. It's not a good loss. Washington State's not Nebraska, like you said. So something to watch here going forward with Arizona can get back on the right track. Houston, we already mentioned them. I won't spend too much time on this. They lost to TCU. We talked about both these teams already on the pod, so going into a long dialogue on this isn't huge. But just something to note, Houston needs to figure out Big 12 play, I think, and TCU gets another big win.
Yeah, TCU 29th in that. I can't remember if I mentioned that when we talked earlier. So they do look like they're putting something together. And there's just a couple names on this team, but this is just another one of those. Time will tell. They've got coming up. I think they have. I don't think they have any games that we're picking. No, they're not. We're only picking a couple of games this week. There's plenty of games we could have picked. I just try to boil it down to what seemed the most interesting, but. I mean, TCU this week, they've got UC and Iowa State. We'll just have to see that. We'll have to see with those games, and they'll tell us what they are. Hopefully, I keep saying, Joe. I wish these teams would just tell us what they are. So we can figure it out and tell our audience what they are. But yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything to add to that at this point.
That's pretty much it. All right, so you have something worth mentioning before we get into our picks. Greg, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so it was an interesting week in the Mountain West. New Mexico lost a game to UNLV, but then they turned around and they beat. Let me see. I had this pulled up, and then we got into some of these other conversations, and I closed my page. So they turn around and beat San Diego State, who I know, we've said is pretty good. Boise State made some noise this week. And this is, I think, kind of where Joe has already said, I've been on the, this conference is a shoe-in for, they're a shoe-in for, 3 bids at this point. But I am kind of seeing some of that cannibalization of, the good teams, beating each other, of course, and then maybe taking some hits here and there. And that might be what prevents them from having, the 3 and 4 bids. There were just some interesting results this week. I know it was Boise State beat, I had it again. I'm sorry. I had it pulled up. But the most surprising thing this week was the New Mexico losing early in the week to, they lost early in the week to UNLV, who's basically a 500 team at the moment. And then they turned around and won. It was a home game, and New Mexico is finally healthy. They've got Jalen House back, so that's good for them. I just want to pull up this Boise State real quick. Because I know they had a good win this week. Oh, they beat Nevada, and they also beat Colorado State this week. And Boise State was a team that I had mentioned. Still got Tyson Dagenhart and a couple other. I believe Max Rice is still on the team, correct, Joe? Off the top of my head, I believe so. So that was a team I had mentioned in the preseason, and now they get 2 decent wins. I know we already kind of said we briefly mentioned Nevada, so they're a team that has maybe a little bit of an inflated record, but Boise State maybe is going to enter that conversation of maybe possibly being a tournament team, or we're going to be looking at kind of what Joe was worried about with the Mountain West, where these teams are going to beat each other up so much that they're only going to end up with 2 bids. So we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I know you mentioned maybe 4 teams getting in, and you're not willing to go as high. And when we started this off, I said 2 or 3. You said 4. Um, I don't know. It's tough because this conference is just a weird thing with a lot of non-conference schedules that weren't that good, or maybe they planned to be good but weren't. Boise State and San Diego State would have been the 2 preseason I would have had in. And Boise State's a fun team to watch. Like I would compare it like to watching an episode of Workaholics. Like the dudes look goofy, but they can ball. Um, just really good team. I think they can get the job done. No one saw Utah State coming, so anyone saying that, they didn't see anything coming. But then you get to like Nevada. Like Nevada's schedule sucked. They're 14-3 now. You get to New Mexico, already 2 conference losses. Where do you go from here? Some teams, as you mentioned, Colorado State's 1-2 in conference. I mean, they had some good non-conference wins too, but where do they go? And UNLV, as you mentioned, not a good team, but they're giving everyone trouble. They almost who did they almost beat Saturday, Greg? They almost beat Utah State Saturday. So
Yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
that's the thing is like the attrition will happen. I still think it's 2 or 3 teams, probably 3 more likely now because Utah State came out of nowhere, but. That's what's gonna is you get some of these games. I mean, the only thing that's helping them is that like the bubble might be a little bit weaker, but everyone's gonna have like a huge win now because everyone's losing. So, all right, so let's get to our picks for the week now that we talked about the Mountain West. We'll start it off with Monday, Martin Luther King Day. We have a day game, Greg. We have Marquette and Villanova. We've mentioned Marquette's struggles. That's kind of why I think we're picking this one, and Villanova as well. A little bit of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde here for them.
It's weird to think of where these two teams were maybe a week or two ago, and I'm still gonna pick. I am, for the record, I'm picking Marquette. That's my take. They just had some injury news come down. We'll just have to see how they handle that. The game is at Marquette. I think that's worth noting. But you know, it's maybe time. We've already said it's maybe time to worry about Marquette a little bit. Villanova's back to being healthy. There's Dixon and Justin Moore, and I mean there's names there. I think we've always said what the question mark is with that team is the coaching, because it's just not Jay Wright at the helm anymore. I'm going to take Marquette. If this game wasn't at Marquette, I would really consider taking Villanova, and it seems like they've got the magic when I pick them, so maybe I'm going to jinx them out of a win. Sorry, guys, I'm not picking you in this one. But, Joe, what are you thinking?
I'll go Marquette for now. If Marquette loses this game, we're having some serious conversations next week. We're probably off of Marquette for a while. Tyler Kolek has to play well in this game. He's had some rough games, and he has to play a lot better for them to get the win. So I'm gonna go Marquette, but with a little bit of Villanova can win this one and really help their resume as well. All right, on Tuesday we have Iowa State at BYU. Now these teams were ranked last week. We'll see if they're ranked this week after all the events that went on. Iowa State, this will be at 9 p.m. Tuesday. I don't have the line on this game. I guess they don't do lines this far out for college basketball. But Greg, who are you going with?
I'm going to go with Iowa State in this game. I am just not a. I am still having trouble believing in BYU. It's one of the reasons that I went ahead and picked. I went ahead and picked UC Cincinnati when they played BYU. And Joe, I actually just checked. I think Omaha Blue actually did get into. We talked about the Houston game. Omaha Blue did not play in, but I was just looking. I think he may have checked. It sounds like from what Twitter is saying, it was one of his first appearances of the year. So I guess maybe he was unhealthy. So just something to look at before game time. This is a big win or a big game for BYU if they want to show us, that they're a force to be reckoned with, because this Iowa State team's just coming off they're just coming off the Houston win. But I'll take Iowa State. What do you think of, Joe?
Iowa State, I'm not a believer in BYU. I'm not a believer in how they play. There's other teams like Dayton and Kentucky who at least have an inside presence who can score a lot of points and help them out. BYU, I mean, it's not like they don't have some guys, but at the end of the day, I think you rely too much on that, you can lose, and Iowa State has a pretty good team. Wednesday, we have Mississippi State at Kentucky. You mentioned Mississippi State being a lot better team with Tolu Smith back at hand, and they had a big win against Tennessee. Kentucky coming off that loss to Texas A&M.
I'm fascinated by this game, much the same reason as I was going to be fascinated by the Tennessee Mississippi State game, which I in error said last week. I was like, I think that's coming up, and then it was that week. So again, sorry I overlooked. Joe's already mentioned it. I'll take my lumps on that one, but I'm going to pick Kentucky. But I am just this Mississippi State defense versus this exciting Kentucky offense. This is the game I'm most excited to watching this week.
Yeah, I'm going Kentucky too. I think again it was on the road, tough environment. They took a loss. They also played a team who hit so many threes. Don't think that's happening for Mississippi State. They were one of, I mean, last year they were one of the worst teams almost ever 3-point shooting. So I think Kentucky can get the job done. And like I said, I like that they have different guys who can kind of attack defenses that are tough. All right, next one up we have Alabama and Tennessee. This one's on noon Eastern on Saturday.
I'm going to take Tennessee. This is just in there because the net the net loves Alabama. So I still need somebody to explain that to me, where that's coming from, why they are so inflated in the net. But this would be a quad one win for Tennessee, even though it's at home. At least that's what it would be for the time being. I think Tennessee's going to win this game. But if you look in the net, this is apparently a huge game for both teams. Tennessee, of course, coming off the loss to Mississippi State this week, so they want to get right. I don't have what I'm sure they play another game this week. I don't have it in front of me, but this would be a good game for them to win. I have not watched. I don't know if you have, Joe. I've not watched a ton of Bama. The only thing I know about them at the moment is the net loves them. So that's it.
Watched a little bit of them. It's not the prettiest basketball. I'm going Tennessee. The defense at least will show up. The offense, if it's there, it'll help them get over the top. Just mentioning with these teams being brought up, Greg, I think you texted me an apology to John Calipari for having Nate Oates and Eric Musselman rated over him, and I just, if you wanted to take this time to offer an apology to the public, even though they didn't know about this conversation, that'd be okay, because I'm keeping receipts now. So Nate Oates needs to get things back on track. This could be a thing that gets him back on track, but especially his lack of tournament success and Musselman's lack of regular season success. If you just put these two coaches together, maybe they're a better coach. BYU and Texas Tech. This is at 6 p.m. on Saturday. We mentioned this because BYU currently ranked, and Texas Tech 2 losses on the season. So who knows?
Yeah, I'm going to take Texas Tech. I take this as the week that BYU kind of tells us that we don't have to pay attention to them anymore. I guess the Iowa State loss will be it because I picked BYU to lose Iowa State. I guess that'll be explainable since Iowa State's looking to be pretty good. Texas Tech, it just seems like they got a lot of wins, but this would be, I think, one of their best wins. I'll take them because they're at home. And then BYU to kind of maybe fall off our radar a little bit. Joe, what are you thinking?
Same here too. I've never been a believer in BYU this season. Texas Tech, raucous environment. Students are probably back in town, I would imagine, and I think they get the job done. It's gonna be a tough place to play and tough place to shoot for sure. And I think Texas Tech gets the win. Last pick we'll make, Greg. Saturday night we have Auburn and Ole Miss. Ole Miss, a lot better of a team this year. Auburn looking like they can compete for the SEC, like we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I really like Auburn. I really liked them early in the year. From the moment I saw them play against Baylor, I'm taking Auburn. Ole Miss, a team that was one of the 3 remaining unbeaten. So it's weird to say that it still would surprise me if they were hanging tough in this game. I know they have a nice record, but that's about all I think they have right now. I don't know. I'm not. It's not quite as much as Oklahoma and BYU, but I'm not a huge believer in Ole Miss. I mean, maybe they'll string a 500 record in the SEC together, and that might be good enough to get them into the tournament. But we'll just have to see. I'm taking Auburn. There's no question for me on this game.
If it was at Ole Miss, I'd take Ole Miss. I'm taking Auburn in this one because it's at home. They have a pretty tough place to play the last several years as well. And I do think their talent's a little bit better. I think Ole Miss has to be viewed as in levels, right? So last year, not a great year. Chris Beard comes in. I think with the transfers, they're like a solid team. But they're not going to be a team who competes at the top of the SEC. They might get in my opinion, they might get up as high as like a 5 or a 6 seed, just based on the games they might play. More likely like a 7 or an 8. But I wouldn't be surprised to see them make the tournament, win a game in the tournament. I think they're pretty good. I think this is a good win for Auburn if they do get it. And then Ole Miss, we'll see if they can rebound and win some of these home games later on. Greg, any final thoughts for the week?
Just that we're looking like you guys are coming up to the UD game on Tuesday. So podcast road trip. Not for me. So it's right down the street for me. Not a road trip for me, but
still gonna go on the road for you too. Yeah, I'm trying to do a thing where I watch a game at every college football and college basketball stadium. I've been at Dayton's arena for the first four. I've been at Dayton's arena for high school basketball games. Never for a Dayton game. Playing St. Louis probably won't be much of a game, but it'll be good to get out, and tickets were cheap. You know, when you have a chance to go to some of these mid-level conference teams and conferences, not conference teams. What's up?
Have you been in since they've done the renovation?
I went to the
when was the last time you were in the stadium?
First four in 2019 when Arizona State and Lou Genstort played St. John's.
I believe the renovation was since then, so the arena will definitely look different to you. It's not like drastically different, but it just opened things up a lot more, kind of like when Xavier added the 360-degree walkway.
I will say, no offense to the host of this, Dayton, but it is one of the worst arenas I've been in. If you get a seat in the upper deck, you're sitting like out in left field. You can barely see anything. I'm excited to see the renovations if that helped it, because I went to Fifth Third Arena from Cincinnati this year, and I originally said that was one of the worst arenas I've been in, because if you're in the upper deck, you have like the low hanging rafters and everything. But they fixed things a little bit, so we'll see if Dayton can move up my rankings here. But trying to go to as many games as possibly. Fun to get a game we watched live and a team that should be making the tournament. Hopefully, Greg, not trying to jinx anything here. That'd be a lot of fun to see them in. So my final thoughts, just like
they might be ranked this week.
They should be ranked, probably. We'll see. My final thought, just remind everyone to like and subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. It helps us out as we go along. We'll be back next week to recap what hopefully is just as crazy of a week as last week, this upcoming week, and then we'll pick our games next week as well. For now, thanks for watching. We'll see everyone next time.